There are a lot of strange laws in history. Laws about what you were allowed to wear, laws about facial hair, laws about who you couldn't marry. There are even laws about animals going to court. And when we hear about these things today, the natural reaction is usually the same. How could anybody think that was a good idea? But here's the thing about weird laws. Most of them didn't feel weird at the time. They felt completely normal because laws don't just control behavior. They reveal what societies care about, what they're afraid of. So take clothing laws, for example. In medieval Europe, governments passed something called sumptuary laws. These laws, they regulated what people were allowed to wear. Certain fabrics were restricted, certain colors were restricted, and in some places, wearing purple was reserved for royalty only. Silks and furs were limited to the upper class. Why? Because clothing wasn't just fashion, it was social structure. If everybody could dress like a noble, the visual hierarchy of society would start to break down. So governments used clothing laws to keep social order visible. Your outfit literally told people where you belonged. Then there were marriage laws. For most of history, marriage wasn't mainly about romance. It was about alliances. Families arranged marriages to secure property, strengthen political relationships, or to maintain social status. Religion also played a huge role. In many places, marriages across religious lines were forbidden. But the idea that marriage should primarily be based on personal choice and romantic love is, actually a relatively recent cultural development. Because for years, people married because they had to. And then we get one of the stranger examples, like facial hair laws. In the late 1600s, Russian ruler Peter the Great introduced something called the beard tax. If a man wanted to keep his beard, he had to pay a fee. After paying, he received a small metal token proving that the tax had been paid. No token, you might be forced to shave. Why did a king care about beards? Well, because Peter wanted Russia to modernize and look more like Western Europe, where clean-shaven faces had become fashionable among the elites. So taxing beards wasn't really about facial hair, it was more about cultural change. Now let's talk about something that sounds almost unbelievable today. Animal trials. Yes, animals were sometimes put on trial in medieval Europe. There are historical records of pigs, cows, and even insects being summoned to court. One famous case involved a pig accused of killing a child. The animal was arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed after a formal trial. It sounds absurd now, but at the time, law and morality were deeply connected. Communities believed justice had to be publicly demonstrated, even when the offender wasn't human. Then there were public punishments. For centuries, punishment was designed to be seen. Criminals were placed in stocks or pillories in town squares. Crowds gathered, people watched. Sometimes they threw food or threw insults, but executions themselves could draw huge audiences. Justice wasn't hidden. It was public theater, public spectacle. The goal was deterrence. So if everybody saw the punishment, then everybody would think twice about breaking the law. That's the theory, right? And finally, sanitation laws, because, as cities grew, shit became a serious problem. Without plumbing or sewer systems, cities had to regulate where shit could go. Ancient Roman cities built large public latrines. Medieval cities sometimes had rules about when and where shit could be dumped. These weren't glamorous laws, but they were essential for keeping the growing populations healthy. And that's the patterns you see again and again in human history. Laws that seem strange to us now often made perfect sense to the people living under them. They reflected the fears of the time. They reflected the priorities of the time and the way the societies understood order. Because what feels normal in one era can feel completely bizarre in another. If history teaches us anything, it's that the rules we take for granted today may look just as strange to people in the future. Which raises an interesting question. What laws today do you think people 100, 200, 300 years from now will look back at and say, what the hell were they thinking?